Malik! What is this? No, wait!
Elena barked orders before the ramp team had finished tying the sleds. Malik pointed at the antenna base. A jagged metal spine split like a broken rib, and the snow around it had been dragged into a wide, black smear. Suspicion hardened Elena's jaw. She counted off perimeter points under her breath and tapped her recorder twice. They had come to recover transmissions, not bodies. Now they had a snapped antenna and a trail that refused to look like ordinary tracks. They cleared the access ramp and moved as a unit. Elena kept her thermal goggles up on her collar. She preferred to hear with her ears first and trust instruments second. She carried the taped field notebook against her ribs, fingers in the leather strap, the old analog recorder clipped to her parka. Her role was simple on paper. Catalog, document, preserve. The snowfield made that sentence smaller. Here, every choice could become a survival rule. Malik, Nami, Anders, fan left, 2 meters between you, Elena. Her voice was low, clinical, the same tone she used when debriefing students. It held a new edge tonight. The team fanned out. Anders tugged at the frost sealing the door. Nami swept a compact scanner along the bulkhead seam. Elena listened to the hiss of their breath and the hollow, distant creak from the antenna mast. They forced the frost-sealed door. Ice flakes avalanched inward and hit the lab floor like brittle rain. Instruments blinked in error codes. Sensor arrays offline, power rails wobbling between readings. A mug sat on the workbench, steam evaporating into the lab air despite no bodies in sight. Nami crouched and touched the mug rim, squinted, then dropped her glove to the table, as if the glove itself were suddenly too warm to hold. Warm, Nami, that was warm within the last hour. Anders, Elena. Anders ran his gloved hand along torn pages pinned under a broken clip. Logs ripped out, he said. He spoke in short bursts, worked that way under stress. Pages gone, tape spool chewed. Elena felt doubt as a pressure at the base of her skull. Doubt shifted her next action. She ordered the recorder and took the corner of a torn log. Her thumb left a line of damp on the page. She slid the analog tape into her palm and clicked the player. Static at first, then a warped voice, then a scrape at the top end that made her teeth ache. The corrupted transmission played once, twice. Nami leaned in and traced the waveform on her tablet with a finger. "It's not interference," she said. "This is clipped in the middle, frequency shift, the voice keeps slipping down." Elena cataloged the file, labeled it breach 0. Her hands were steady, but her breathing showed. Fear arrived as another change in the room. She found her fingers tightening on the recorder until the small burn mark on her thumb pressed into the plastic. Fear pushed her to act, not to theorize. She set a rule. Leave the comms file intact and bring the recorder out sealed. Log everything, Elena. No speculation. Record only what's verifiable. Ast. Malik Rise clicked his tongue. Verifiable, he repeated. So, a shadow made off with a person and the machinery spat static at us. Malik had a soldier's vocabulary. He used it to steady himself and others. His words came faster now. What exactly is a verifiable smear? That smear, Anders cut in. He was pointing out the window. Look, they moved to the communications alcove. Exterior cameras showed nothing but blown snow and a horizon that swallowed light. One feed snapped to static while another showed a slow, long silhouette stretching across the drift. When it passed near the weather mast, the image thinned and tore like film. Anders swore and went for boots. "Don't go alone, Elena." She heard the hesitation in her own voice and forced it flat. "Nami, trace that feed. Malik, check external kit." "Anders, stay with me." They stepped out under a sky bruised by twilight. The weather mast sat 40 meters away. Instruments lay collapsed, their sensors bent as if pressed flat. Malik and Anders moved to the array with lamp beams cutting the snow. Anders found a single glove half buried, the cuff stiff with blackened ice. The glove had blood on the inside, congealed and dark as motor oil. When Malik crouched to examine the ground, his breath left in a thick plume and his lamp struck a smear in the snow where footprints dissolved into a straight, flat smear of darkness. "Those aren't tracks, Malik." His voice went quieter. "They just end." Elena put a hand on his shoulder. Her palm felt cold through his parka shell. She wanted to tell him this would be a standard evidence kit, a controlled retrieval. Instead, she told him a protocol she had learned in training. Photograph, measure, don't touch more than necessary. She counted off measurements and ordered a perimeter tape. Back inside, the security hub showed a camera loop where a figure unlatched a vehicle and vanished between frames. The feed curdled into static and then returned with an elongated silhouette moving across the snow like spilled ink. Anders stood at the monitor and blinked until his eyes watered. "I was here, Anders. I locked the vehicles. I saw my footprints." Malik read the timestamp out loud and then swore. Anders was at the staging. He can be gone. They ran. The staging area smelled of diesel and cold leather. The transport rig sat idle, ignition dead. Anders' footprints ran from the driver a step to a dark smear on the snow and stopped. Elena dropped to her knees and pressed her gloved palm to the smear. The snow took the heat instantly. The smear remained a matte black, not wet, not reflective, an absence, as if something had wiped the crystalline structure clean. Fear turned to urgency. Elena barked in order to fall back to the lab. "We secure the tapes. We move the team to shelter. Anders gets priority on search when we can keep comms." Her words were crisp. Her hands moved to check the logger and the recorder. Naomi grabbed the corrupted tape and wrapped it in an evidence pouch, hands shaking. Down the corridor came a sound like a fabric being pulled taut, and then a hiss that took the lights. A ripple of darkness slid along the floor edge and extinguished the strip lighting where it passed. Electronics blinked, panels misread, and a low-pressure wave rolled the breath from their chests. Naomi stuttered, then whispered, "Do you hear?" The ripple passed breathing close to Malik's boot, and he swore, swung his lamp, and the beam cut into nothing. The darkness moved without volume, without texture, and when it reached the doorway it lingered as if considering entry. Elena stood with her hand on the doorframe. Everything in her training told her to pull back, to retreat and wait for backup. The recorder was in her pocket. The field notebook was in her hand. She had to pick one action. Doubt flickered through her like static. Doubt made her step forward. She shoved her recorder out and held it on the edge of the ripple. "Document," she said. "If this is a breach, we have to have a record." Malik grabbed her arm. "Elena, back up. We don't know what that is." "Naomi, record everything, Elena." Her voice had the low, breathy calm they knew from her briefings. "Keep a distance. Tag the file." Naomi backed up, thumbs moving on the tablet to create a time-stamped file. Malik took a defensive stance. The ripple slid past the doorway into the corridor and brushed against Malik's sleeve. He staggered, hand to his chest, breathing quick. When he pulled his glove away, there were no burn marks, only a cling of ice crystals where the fabric had been touched. That contact changed the room. Malik's pupils were wide. Anders was still gone. The team had to make a decision. Elena counted the stakes in sequence: the corrupted tape, the missing man, the outpost's antenna broken at the base. She set another rule. Preserve evidence first, evacuate when transport works. She shoved the recorder back into her parka, sealed the lab door, and ordered a search with tether lines. They moved on foot into deeper snow. Naomi held a tablet with signal overlays, Malik carried a compact winch, and Elena kept the map sheath against her chest. The snowfield was a country of white mounds, and the outpost's silhouette receding behind them. The wind carried a metallic taste into Elena's mouth. She felt resolve harden, resolve to leave something behind that would explain what happened here. They found Anders at the edge of the instrument field. He was standing and staring at the horizon with his hands limp at his sides. His coat was intact. He had no visible injuries. He did not speak when Elena called his name. His eyes tracked something that Elena could not see. "Anders!" Malik demanded. "Talk to me." Anders turned his head slowly. He blinked as if waking. His voice came out small. It moved. Elena crouched. She looked him in the face. "What did it do, Anders? Tell me what you saw." He reached for the glove half, buried with the black ice, and held it up like an object found on a roadside. "It was like a hole in the snow," he said. "It shifted and the tracks just ended. Then I heard metal scraping, like fingernails on thin aluminum, and it was behind me. I turned and it wasn't tear-shape. It was a smear and it smelled like burnt wiring." Naomi leaned in. "Burnt wiring." Anders nodded slowly. "Like the mast when it failed. And then the camera, on the feed, it showed a long silhouette stretching and thinning. I thought it was a trick. I ran to the vehicle and then he swallowed and could not finish." Elena reached for the recorder and clicked it on to capture his words for the log. She structured questions. Exact times, distances, whether Anders had seen movement in the sky or heard voices. Anders answered in short bursts. The dialogue was clipped efficient. Each name invoked someone to act. Elena, Malik searched. Naomi logged. On return to the lab, they reviewed the corrupted transmission again. The warped voice described a shadow moving across the snow and ended on a high-pitched scrape. Naomi enhanced the file and pulled a micro-second spike that had not been apparent before. They listened. The spike was a pattern of clicks underneath the scrape, rhythmic and consistent like a pulse. Naomi marked it as non-random. "How many times does it loop?" Malik, he rubbed the bridge of his nose. "If that's a signal, we could triangulate a source." Elena considered and then shook her head. "Not yet. It corrupts equipment. Any active scanning risks more failures. We have to be careful, log then act." They packed the recorder, wrapped tapes in foil, and tagged the torn log pages. The Outpost's internal comms were failing in waves. Every 15 minutes a burst of static spread through the panels and then receded. During one burst a voice came through, strained and thin. It repeated a single phrase, do not pass the tracks." The line cut off at the second repetition. That phrase became a rule on the tongue of everyone in the lab. Elena wrote it into the field notebook. "Do not pass the tracks." She wrote the letters with a pen that left a wet streak. She closed the notebook and wrapped the tapes in a plastic bag. They attempted to start the transport. Electronics refused. The winch failed under minimal load. The team argued with each other fast and hard for several minutes. 3 to 5 barbed exchanges where trust strained. "Naomi, why not run an override?" Malik demanded. "Because the override trips the grid," Naomi snapped. "We lose power to life support, and we done open that trade." "Anders, you saw the tracks stop." Malik, "We can just stand here." "I didn't say stand, Anders. I said I saw it. We can go on foot." "We go on foot," Elena decided, "but we bury the physical media." "Naomi, pack the tapes and the notebook." Malik, "Mark our path." "Anders, help me carry evidence." "We move before dawn." They dug a shallow pit beyond the perimeter and buried the tape canisters and notebook beneath a mound, tamped snow over them, and placed a small antenna shard as a marker. Elena pressed the final shovelfuls down until the mound looked like a drift. She placed the recorder in a sealed case, and then pushed it under the mound with the heel of her boot. As they were tucking the last tag into place, Naomi paused and said, "There's something else on the recorder. I didn't hear it until I slowed the file down." Elena took the recorder back. Naomi had isolated a whisper beneath the scrape, faster than speech and oddly precise. When slowed, it articulated letters, A-N-D-E-R-S, followed by a time code. Elena set the time code against the camera logs. It matched the moment Anders' footprints ended. Someone or something spelled his name, Naomi. Malik looked at Anders. Anders' jaw worked. He moved to pick up the half-buried glove and then let it fall. "It knew me," he said. "It knew me the way you know a tool." Fear changed to a cold clarity. Elena ordered them to move further from the outpost. They retreated to a makeshift camp beyond the perimeter and set watches. They left one recorder alive and buried the rest. Elena recorded a sealed survivor log into the remaining device. Her voice was low, clipped and timed. She listed losses, listed corrupted logs, and listed rules for anyone returning. Rule 1. Approach with a minimum 4-person tether and maintain visual contact. Rule 2. Never scan the silhouette with active emitters. Rule 3. Recover physical media and bury at safe distance. Rule 4. If a trace in snow dissolves into a smear, do not pursue alone. She spoke each rule and then stopped to tap the recorder twice. The recorder picked up a faint scrape at the end of her 4th rule. She did not move toward the sound. She closed the session, sealed the device, and handed it to Nami. Morning found them hollow with sleep, but driven by procedure. They packed what they could on foot and left the disabled vehicles behind. They set the antenna shard as a marker and walked in silence with their gloves tucked into pockets, hands clenching maps and tools. At first light, the horizon showed no movement other than their own breath. Before they left, Elena dug up the mound to retrieve the sealed case and confirmed the tapes remained intact. The buried recorder hummed with a low static. She slid it into her inner pocket, closed her notebook, and shoved the mound flat. She looked back once at the outpost receding into a smear of cold shapes. Do not pass the tracks, Anders quietly. He had the smallest voice among them now. Elena repeated the rule aloud and then added a final line into her log, not for the record but for anyone who might come after. If you must return, bring more than instruments, bring rules and the willingness to leave evidence where it belongs. They left the snow behind and walked toward the transport line where assistance might arrive. Elena carried the sealed recorder and the notebook against her chest. She felt the emotion shift through her body, suspicion into doubt, into fear, into procedural resolve, and she guided the team by checklist and count. They kept moving until the horizon ate their figures, and the outpost became a dark spot in the distance. At dawn, as the cold thinned and their breath sharpened, Elena stopped and set the recorder on a small rock. She clicked it open and said into it, naming each person, describing exact times and positions, and listing the final status of evidence. The tape wound slowly. Static crept at the edges. When she sealed it, the recorder registered a short spike of interference and a whisper that could not be parsed. Elena did not chase the whisper. She zipped the recorder into a pocket, closed her notebook, and walked on. The final paragraph of her sealed log was a single instruction. Leave this, bury this, mark it. Her hand left a smudge on the back cover where a thumb had pressed too hard. They reached the staging point as a cold wind rose. Elena glanced back once more, then squared her shoulders. Someone called her name and she turned. Malik had set a rope in a half hitch and handed it to her. We moved together. She took the rope. They threaded it between them like a precaution and walked toward the waiting convoy. Elena felt the urge to promise she would come back for Anders and for the outpost. Instead, she made a different promise aloud. Follow the rules, document everything, and do not go past the tracks alone. A radio crackled at the edge of range. Static filled the cab and then a single voice, weak and close to broken, said, "File discontinued." Elena did not answer. She tapped the recorder twice and pressed it against her chest as they climbed into the vehicles. When the convoy pulled away, the outpost shrank to a distant cluster. Nami kept looking at the horizon. Anders stared at his hands. Malik checked the harness one more time. Elena put the notebook away and watched the snow swallow the antenna shard marker. The final image she carried was concrete. A small mound of tamped snow and beneath it a sealed case with tapes that might explain nothing and everything. She slid her hand into her pocket and felt the recorder's edges. It thrummed with analog static like a heartbeat. She set her jaw, and the team rode into the pale light with a protocol to follow and a buried log that might guide them back, or warn them never to return. The playback cut halfway through a technician's breath and a warped voice clipped the comms. "Shut it." The lights hit zero and a gust of static sucked the air from the communications room. Alina shoved the recorder toward the console and barked, "Stop the file!" Suspicion tightened Alina's jaw. She did not trust a live fragment that sounded like someone they knew. She counted the immediate risks aloud, tapping the recorder twice before she spoke again, and the others moved outward from the console like animals obeying a natural boundary. Alina's suspicion drove her first decisions. She had arrived with orders to recover transmissions and catalog what remained. Now she ordered a technical freeze while she listened for anything that could be real. Field Tech Malik crouched at the floor rack, fingers white around a fiber harness. Tech Sokolov kept his boots at the threshold, hands on his rifle. Sergeant Ortiz had his back to the doorway and his breath fogged the dim light. "You heard that? Malik?" That was Sokolov on Channel 1. He did not sound certain. His voice wobbled against the hum of generators. "It wasn't him, Sokolov. He's here." He held up both hands. "I didn't he." Alina cut him with a short motion. "Log the time code." Malik, record the waveform. Ortiz, slow sweep the perimeter camera. She spoke like someone trimming variables from an equation. Her manner remained measured, but the tapping under her breath had become a rhythm. She was counting perimeter points, then the nodes, then the last confirmed human movements. That counting steadied her hands. The corrupted clip opened with an urgency that didn't match any voice print. Words collapsed into metallic rasping and then, clear enough that the team flinched, a warning in Malik's timbre. "Do not follow the tracks." The console window blinked an impossible timestamp. 42 minutes after all systems had shut down. Sokolov saw and shoved the waveform into a spectral zoom, while Alina leaned in and tilted her head the way she did when listening to degraded audio. Doubt arrived as a physical tug in her gut. She had been trained to accept corrupted transmissions as data points. This was different. The clip carried intent masked as familiarity. Alina unfastened her parka collar and pressed her thumb against the recorder's metal seam where a small burn mark lived. That thumb had scabbed over after the satellite relay failure 2 months earlier. She touched it now because action calmed her. If it's mimicry, it's hostile. Ortiz, we cut power and it still reaches us. He didn't look at Sokolov when he said it. Ortiz kept scanning the doorway like he expected someone to step through it, hostile or adaptive. Alina, either way, we stopped feeding it audio vectors. She jabbed the console with a fingertip and initiated a local loop. The lights breathed back to life on dim emergency power. Sound remained ragged. On playback, the fragment frayed into a squeal and repeated the phrase. "Do not follow the tracks. Do not." A cold technical argument followed. Sokolov wanted to attempt a cautious restore of the server to pass the corrupt frames. Ortiz forbade it. Alina watched both men as if they were instruments in a test she could fully control. The disagreement was not abstract. It translated into the configuration lines Sokolov scrolled and Ortiz's hand resting on the release latch for the armory locker. "If we bring the server up, we risk opening the return channel, Ortiz. We do not know what opening looks like out there. I will not die for a file." He spoke with the bluntness of a man who had seen living men frozen to the bone. Sokolov snapped back fast, 3 short sentences propelled by procedural anger. "We don't leave unknown data seeded in black. We isolate and restore. We learn what hit them. We follow protocol." His words were methodical. He used bullet points in speech like a technician who believed process was a shield. They went at it for 3 minutes that felt like an hour. Alina listened and tilted her head, and her doubt shifted toward a decision. She had a duty to retrieve data, and the logs might tell why the antenna base had been split like a broken rib. She also remembered seeing the smear around that spine in the field 2 days earlier, the snow dragged into black across the metal like grease. She had barked orders before the ramp team had finished tying sleds on that run. That memory was a concrete map in her head, not a vague sentiment. "We do a targeted sweep, Alina." Her voice was restrained. "We follow the vanished tracks. We take 2 and we stay within line of sight. Ortiz is in charge outside." Sokolov, you back up comms remotely. Malik, you and I find the notebook and any physical evidence around the antenna. The team split on her command, which fractured cohesion immediately. Ortiz grunted his dissent but nodded, and Sokolov shut down his argument and began reconfiguring access credentials in a tight, deliberate manner. They'd unpark us from the rack, moved past recirculating heat and into the bleach, bright world of the bunker's exterior. The snow ate sound. Elena's breath came in short, measurable pulls that she marked silently. The moon was low and waxed thin. Its light flattened the drifts to paper planes. Footprints led from the service track to the antenna mast, and then ended in a patch of disturbed snow that had been swiped to a sheen. No bodies, no blood. Just a shallow, shimmering depression where the last human steps had vanished. Elena knelt and ran a gloved hand across the surface. The snow didn't flake. It compressed and left a black smear under her glove. Malik crouched on her left and scraped a sample into a cryobox. He hummed a taut sound. This wasn't wind, Malik, this was dragged. You can see the grass lit like it's been laid out flat. His voice had a nasal quality when he was cold. It's consistent with previous distortions. Elena. She did not say the name of the thing they suspected. Instead, she catalogued. Glossed snow, compressed air pockets, no scent beyond dead ozone. That inventory made her feel anchored. Returning to the outpost, they found the server room in partial disarray. Racks were intact, but several drives had been yanked free and taped over with frost. The video frame extracts they recovered were a handful of frozen, degraded frames. One showed a doorway smeared with blackened ice and a handprint that looked blurred as if someone had tried to wipe it away. The log files looped impossible timestamps, frames that doubled back on themselves, and a text entry that cycled. Do not follow the tracks. Containment failure. Sokolov and Ortiz argued procedure again. This time the argument turned into an operational fracture. Ortiz insisted they seal the site and call the regional containment office. Sokolov pushed for a limited restore to extract the audio channels from masked fragments. Elena stood between them and watched the energy of the room tilt. You don't understand what a restore might do here, Ortiz. You bring those frames up and whatever can mimic us will get a full voice profile. He jabbed a finger at Sokolov. You want to hand it our keys. Sokolov answered with a clipped set of orders and technical certainties. We don't have keys. We have fragments. We can mask, we can isolate. We can pull the page that's stamped authorized and see who signed the release. He thumbed through the corrupted notebook pages they de-staged on the lab table earlier. The pages were smeared, letters bled into each other like cheap ink in water. Elena felt the second emotional shift. Doubt tightened into fear. Not immediate panic, but a physical clutch that made her fingers tremble when she reached for the digital wrist logger. Her breathing shortened. She found that she had to place her palm flat on the lab table to steady herself. The fear was a motor. It moved her into action. She did not allow it to paralyze her. On the playback monitor, a frame resolved for a fraction of a second. A silhouette on the horizon, elongated and quick, a ripple like oil spread across snow. Malik pressed his hands to his face and said, "That was on the east service track. That's where the crew went." He looked up at Elena with a narrow, urgent tone. "We have to go now." Elena opened her mouth and then closed it. They had argued procedure. The physical traces were outside. She thought of the burned antenna spine and the smeared snow. She thought of the field notebook they found half buried, its cover smeared by a blurred handprint like a shadow. The notebook contained a scrawled line that read, "If the tracks vanish, do not follow." The line was crossed out and then rewritten. "If the tracks vanish, do not follow, do not restore." The handwriting jittered as if written with gloved hands in cold. "We go slow, Elena, we take a narrow sweep. Ortiz, you watch the perimeter. Sokolov, stay on the console with comms masked. Malik, with me." Ortiz barked in order that tightened into a string of curses, but he accepted the post. The dawn sky looked like washed steel. The tracks reappeared in the glare, and then disappeared again at the antenna field where the snow lay pulled flat in a broad black smear. Alina's boots sank into powder that rattled like crushed paper. There was no wind, but the snow panned away in eddies that behaved like small whirlpools, and the temperature read out on her wrist logger plummeted in a way that made her teeth ache. They found the notebook half buried near the service track, the cover scored with a smudged handprint and a page with scrawled protocol warnings. Alina opened to the middle and read aloud, keeping her voice staccato and shallow to match the cold. "Do not attempt full restore," she said. "Containment vectors may mimic voice profiles." Who wrote that? Malik, someone from the crew. Alina, Ortiz saw friction around the antenna. "We documented it." She paused and tapped the page. "This matches what we saw at the mast." Someone tried to warn them. Her breath left a small white ring. A restored clip played again in the server room while Sokolov wrestled with masking parameters. The clip erupted with Malik's inflection and then unspooled into a line none of them had heard. "Don't he trust Ortiz?" The words sat like a thrown pebble in a pond and sent ripples through the team's trust. "That's not me, Ortiz." He sounded stripped raw. "I was standing at the door. I didn't tee." There was a rapid exchange of 3 to 6 interjected lines between Ortiz, Sokolov, and Malik. Claim, denial, accusation, counter. Elena let them argue until she could hear the edges of truth. She watched Ortiz's jaw work, saw his fingers flex against the armory locker. She saw Sokolov's face go pale when he realized the restored clip had generated a direct accusation. Elena's suspicion took a new form, caution toward her own team. The playback had shifted command authority by mimicking voices. The entity, if it could mimic, could undermine their cohesion. Her counting under her breath turned into a list of contingencies. Lock the rest rooms, secure the line of sight, commit to the notebook instructions. She spoke a short, decisive sentence. "We stop restores. We isolate physical evidence only. We do not boot the server beyond a sandboxed read." She looked at each man. "If the playback accuses someone, we treat it as an attack vector." They moved under that rule. The group's rhythm changed. Words grew shorter and their body language tightened into single lines of responsibility. Elena and Malik headed back out with a sampling kit while Ortiz and Sokolov held the line. The wind came with the pre-dawn and carried the thin hollow sound of something shifting on the horizon. They were halfway to the service track when the horizon rearranged itself into a formless ripple. It was not a figure. It was a smear moving as a single, stretched shadow across the drifts, a thin dark swell that drank reflected light and left a cold absence behind it. Malik froze mid-step and hissed. His glove clenched a sampling blade so tight his knuckles blanched. "We hold, Elena." She felt fear refine into focus. Her hands found Malik's shoulder and squeezed back away slowly. "Keep eyes on the ripple. Do not run. Do not shout. Keep line of sight." Her directives were short, direct, and shaped the team's movement. The first contact happened without a sound. Malik's left boot caught in nothing and then slipped into a hollow the snow should not have had. He flailed, and an invisible pressure closed around his thigh like a hand. "Elena!" he shouted. The shout ruptured the quiet, and the ripple reacted by folding inward and accelerating. Elena grabbed Malik's parka and hauled. Her fingers closed on fabric and clipped webbing, and she pulled his weight back toward the track. Ortiz and Sokolov threw themselves forward, and together they heaved. Malik slid free enough for Elena to get a knee under him and drag him to flat ground. The smear on the snow spread an inch wider where Malik had been snagged. Ortiz saw and scanned the horizon. It reached him like a vacuum. He said, "It doesn't touch. You feel pressure and then you lose ground." He spat into the snow and set his jaw. Whoever wrote that notebook, they were right. Do not follow the tracks. His words were a physical thing. You could hear the memory of the missing crew in them. Malik's breath came in jagged pulls. He tried to laugh once, and it came out as a strained cough. That pull felt like being pinched from the inside, like the snow wasn't supposed to give way. he said. His voice was flat, his face gray. I thought I was falling through ice. Alina's hands were steady when she checked him for injury. A burn on his forearm had not been there before. A gray, crusted film had sealed like a smear. She pressed a gloved finger to it and felt a slight adhesion. The wound didn't bleed, but the skin around it had a waxy cold. She tore off a bandage and taped it with gloved fingers because motion kept her from sinking into panic. This was the chapter's climax, a formless ripple that moved like a stretched shadow toward them, stealing purchase on terrain and grasping at ankles. The lights on the outpost flickered and then quit entirely. For 30 seconds they were a ring of silhouettes in a grey world, and the thing moved with a speed that denied mass. Alina made choices, then, as if reading from a protocol she had written on the fly. She ordered a retreat, pull to the outpost. Leave gear. Fire only if you see a physical form. Do not chase. Her voice did not falter. She unzipped her parka and offered textile rope to wrap around Malik's midsection. The rope was a tether for hauling him back to the door where Ortiz could lock them in. They reached the threshold in a sprint that felt like falling. Sokolov slammed the door and jammed a crowbar into the seam. Someone had tripped the external alarms. A staccato siren punched at the air and then muttered into analog noise. Elena slotted the notebook into a sealed evidence bag and felt her hands shake. Inside the comms room they counted losses and reviewed raw transmissions. The last intact recordings looped a pleading directive in a voice that wasn't quite one sound. Containment was never restored. We opened the line. We thought we could lure it away. The clip fragmented into a redacted emergency entry that read on the log as a final instruction. Initiate sacrificial sweep to anchor entity. Seal this file. The entry had been blacked out in portions and a digital hand appended. Locked, authorized. The twist settled like cold iron. Someone at the outpost had attempted to lure whatever agency these phenomena obeyed by intentionally creating vectors, audio, movement, and then a sweep, as a way to draw the anomaly out. The attempt had not worked as planned. The corrupted files implied containment had been converted into bait. Whoever had written the notebook had tried to stop a repeat. The notebook had been half buried in the snow by hands that left a smeared handprint. Elena felt a final emotional shift. Fear moved toward grim resolution. She had responsibility for preserving what remained and preventing another team from repeating those same motions. She looped the evidence into the secure archive, set the server logs to write only, and recorded a short voice memo. Her voice was flat, precise, and she counted off facts rather than feelings. Field recovery complete, she said into the old analog recorder. 1 injured. 3 personnel accounted. Evidence. Degraded server frames, smoothed and smeared snowfield, half-buried field notebook with cross-out warning. Recommend site sealed and approach restricted. Do not attempt full restore. Do not re-establish external feeds. Tag containment office. Archive as level C. Hazardous audio mimicry. She paused and tapped the recorder twice. The tape clicked with a hollow reverence. Sokolov wanted to run another diagnostic. Ortiz wanted to call command and hand off authority. Malik wanted to sleep. Elena balanced their demands and made the choice that felt like the only viable ethics left. She would document, and then she would lock. She moved with steady motions and did the administrative acts that amount to containment. Checksum, catalog number, physical bagging, cross, reference. Each action was a line of defense. She archived the corrupted logs and then recorded a simple written directive into the recovery manifest. If you recover this file, proceed to quarantine protocol A. Notify regional authority by secure channel. Do not transmit audio samples over open net. She signed and then circled the initials with a felt tip pen until she could see the ink settle. When the paperwork was finished, Elena walked to the observation window that framed the service tracks. The glass had been fogged by condensed breath. She wiped a clean line with a sleeve and saw a fresh smear across the interior surface. It was not a clear handprint. It was a blurred, dark impression the size of a palm, the edges soft like someone had dragged a glove across the pane from the outside. She set the notebook on the sill and touched the smear with a gloved fingertip. The surface felt cold and slightly tacky. She pressed a palm to the glass and felt the skin of her hand heat under the glove as if the smear absorbed warmth. Elena tapped the recorder twice, the habitual motion she'd done since they found the antenna, and spoke aloud into the empty room. "Archive sealed," she said. "Containment notation appended. Field team withdraws, site locked." Her voice did not ask for anything. It stated what had been done. Ortiz came up behind her and looked at the mark on the window. He did not ask who had left it. He only said, "We did what we could." The sentence carried everything they had traded for: the men who had vanished, the burns on Malik's arm, the smear at the mast. Elena nodded once and placed the evidence bag into the archive slot. She turned the key until it clicked. The drawer slid forward with an industrial thud and locked. There were no dramatic pronouncements. There was only the mechanized close of a metal compartment and the soft, distant sound of analog static that wound down like an old clock. The final intact transmission remained on loop in the server buffer. A voice that may have been 3 different people layered into one pleading phrase. The last line that had not been redacted read, "We opened containment to save it from spreading. It took what we asked it to have." Elena read the words twice and then made a note in the manifest. Containment breach likely intentional. Motive unclear. Evidence suggests sacrificial sweep initiated by unknown crew member S. She stopped there because conjecture would not help the next team who might follow their tracks. She drafted a short protocol addendum and stamped it with a digital seal that marked the file restricted. She then recorded one final analog note, not for command but for anyone who might later slide the drawer open themselves. "Do not re-establish external feeds." She tapped the recorder twice. "Do not follow the tracks." She slid the recorder into the evidence bag and locked it. Before she left the archive alcove, she wiped the observation glass again, just to be sure. The smear remained a faint halo. She breathed out and felt her shoulders lower by a fraction. The immediate crisis had closed. The personnel in the bunker's log were accounted for as far as she could tell. She had documented, she had contained, she had refused procedures that would hand voice profiles back to the anomaly. On the stair back to the loading bay, Ortiz touched her sleeve and said, "We bury the mast lines tomorrow. We burn the rest of the sample, hear it like a procedural order, not an appeal." Elena looked at him, then at Malik and Sokolov, who followed with hollow steps, and she nodded. "We do it by protocol and we log everything. No open transmissions. No restoration without secure transport." She spoke practically and placed the responsibility where it belonged. Outside, the mast glinted in pale dawn. The black smear around its base had a new fringe, like oil pushed outward. Elena crouched and scraped at a fresh rim of frost. The sample came away with a stringy texture that held a metallic taste when they ran a field test. It registered anomalous on every sensor. The final concrete action of the day was not an argument or a long speech. It was a physical lock. Elena sealed the last evidence bag, wrote her initials in heavy strokes across the manifest page, and slid the package into the secure locker. She turned the tumbler 3 times. The lock clicked and the mechanical noise filled the room with the finishing sound of containment. She did not feel triumphant. She felt exhausted and responsible in a way that made her hands ache. She held the manifest to her chest, thumbed the tape recorder once more, and dropped it into an evidence pocket. Then she walked to the observation window and looked out at the service tracks. There was a smear on the inside of the glass. It looked like a hand, but it was wrong. The edges softened, and the center held a darker absence. Elena touched the smear with a fingertip through the glass and felt the cold tack. She could not tell whether it had been made from inside or outside. She straightened, turned from the window, and closed the archive drawer. The lock clicked a final time outside. The wind eased. Inside, The recorder's last click sat in the manifest like a sealed promise. Elena counted perimeter points once more, only this time out of habit, and walked away with the sealed archive in hand. The log was complete. The injured would be evacuated with priority, the manifest filed to regional command, and the outpost would remain restricted. The smear on the window lingered as a physical remainder, a material trace left on glass. Elena left the building without opening the drawer. She did not speak the name of the thing they had faced. She set the evidence in the sled, and she marked the coordinates in the recovery file. She walked toward the sled team with a measured step and the recorder muted in its bag. At the edge of the complex, she glanced back once. The old mast stood like a splintered spine against the dawn. The smear at its base was a dark ring against white. She herself, the containment, was the best she could make of what they'd found. She tightened the straps on the sled as if fastening the last piece of a procedure into place. Then she climbed aboard, and they left the outpost behind. They left the tracks they had followed, and the smeared notebook, and the redacted entry, and the living hurt of Malik's arm. Elena recited the sequence of locked actions in her head like a closing checklist. She kept the recorder under her jacket and did not press play. The drawer clicked once more in her mind. The archive was sealed. The evidence bag was locked. The last transmission remained in the server buffer, looping a plea and an instruction she had written into the manifest. When they crossed the ridge, the outpost became small and then smaller. The smear on the window was a concrete thing she could picture without needing to see it again. She did not promise safety. She promised record-keeping, procedure, and a warning stamped into a manifest that any future recovery team would find. Do not follow the tracks. Do not restore the server. Elena counted the steps to the sled as they moved away, the way she had counted perimeter points in the comms room. The count steadied her more than any briefing. She held the manifest against her chest and felt the weight of paper and tape. She had done what she could. Behind them, the outpost's observation window held the smear. It would remain there when the sun rose higher and the day breathed out into a long, unbroken light. Elena did not look back more than once. She drove forward with a rigid calm and a repository of facts that would be read and argued over by people who had not been there. That thought comforted her and unsettled her at once. When the sled team reached the rendezvous, Elena handed the manifest and the sealed evidence bag to Recovery Command. She signed the receiving log. She watched the men take the package and heard the lock click again as they slid it into their transport. The file would travel through secure channels. It would be recorded and compartmentalized. She breathed out, an ordinary exhale that left a fog, and stepped away. The final concrete moment came as she felt Ortis' hand clamp once on her shoulder and then release. Nothing more. He walked back toward the outpost with a shovel over his shoulder, ready to bury what they could. Elena moved to the sled that would carry them south. On the final page of the manifest, she scrawled one line in a hand that did not shake. Do not follow the tracks. Then she slid the paper into the archive and closed the drawer. The lock clicked a last time, a mechanical punctuation to the day's actions. Outside, the smear on the observation window remained a dark, physical mark that no one would mistake for metaphor. It sat there, tactile and true. That concrete stain closed the chapter and became the thing she left behind as proof of what they had found. She did not say it was over. She did not offer any speech about ending or renewal. She only walked to the sled, climbed aboard, and faced forward. The radio sat muted. The evidence was sealed. The window retained a smear of darkness. She rode away with the manifest under her arm and the recorder in its bag, counting perimeter points until the outpost was a small notch on the horizon and the snow swallowed their tracks.